Hi, everyone. My name is Marilyn, and I'm currently a senior studying economics and public policy. After moving to Berkeley from suburban Chicago around 3 years ago, I quickly recognized how deeply rooted technology is in the culture of the Bay Area. Considering my limited exposure to the tech ecosystem, media was my main way in, and Wired.com specifically was one of the sites that acted as my Silicon Valley 101. I'm very excited to introduce John Battelle, who in addition to co-founding Wired magazine, has been a serial entrepreneur, journalist, and professor with a strong curiosity revolving around the media industry. John received his bachelor's degree in anthropology and master's in journalism, both from UC Berkeley. He later returned to Cal as the Bloomberg Chair in Business Journalism for the Graduate School of Journalism. He has held senior leadership positions in several media-related companies and most recently founded NewCo, which connects executives, entrepreneurs, and investors through an innovative media platform. John currently serves as chair of the board of directors of Sovereign Holdings, an advertising and publisher platform connecting publishers with monetization solutions. He founded and acted as the executive producer of the Web 2.0 Summit, which brings together senior executives from the worlds of tech, media, finance, telecom, entertainment, and the internet. He is also a published author, writing the international bestseller, The Search: How Google and its Rivals Rewrote the Rules of Business and Transformed Our Culture. It's now published in 25 languages. He's currently working on a second book titled If Then, and has appeared on several national and international news channels. His many awards and honors include Global Leader for Tomorrow and the Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum, and one of the most important people on the web by PC World. And now, here's John.
I want to get to know you first. Raise your hand if you're undergraduate. All right, keep them up if you're below a junior. All right, you're not raising your hand. And if you're a graduate student? Now raise your hand if you're in engineering. All right, thank you. That's what I needed to know. Because so we have a lot of graduate students and engineering folks. I am not an engineer, but I write about them. And through the companies that I've started, I've worked with a lot of them. And I have a lot of respect for them. This is the patio at Twitter. It's a pretty cool place to work. And what I want to talk to you today is sort of the almost academic framing of the idea that I'm really excited about right now, which is expressed in the company I'm currently running called NewCo. But I think it's a much bigger idea than any company can really evince. It's what I think is the biggest shift that's happening in our culture today. And it's been part of a long narrative, which was the focus of the last lecture that I did here, that I've been involved with, which is trying to tell the story of how technology is impacting culture. But before we get started, I wanted to level set, because we're at Cal, and I'm really excited to be at Cal. I'm a little bit nervous to be at Cal. Cal means a lot to me. So the year 1922, okay, almost 100 years ago, was the year my grandfather graduated from Cal. The year 1956 is when my father and my mother graduated from Cal. The year 1985 is when my sister graduated from Cal. The year 1987 is when I graduated from Cal. 1992 is when I graduated from Cal again. 2001 to 2005 is when I taught at Cal. 2020 is when my daughter is going to graduate from Cal. That's 100 years. And my daughter is here. So I would have made my 13-year-old go for like 2028, but she's at home and I don't want to embarrass her. So, you know, this number, 7,200 and counting, is how many times I have sung the Cal drinking song to my kids before they went to bed. That's a true number. It's an estimate. But I literally sang the Cal drinking song to every one of my children, sort of between 0 and 12 years old. You can do the math. Over 36 years. So I'm all about Cal. I love Cal. I love coming back here. It's an honor to be here. So let's get into it. I really think there's something big going on, and I've been saying this for 30 years, but it's bigger now than it was 30 years ago when I started covering Apple as a technology reporter, and 5 years later when we started Wired Magazine. This picture over here is of Henry Ford's manufacturing plant in the background, and this picture over here is the workplace at the new Google headquarters where they all do yoga all the time. And they have a running track, and it's all awesome. Everything is awesome. You can see that working here doesn't look so awesome. Working here looks great, right? How many of you would probably be okay with working at a place like Google after you graduated? Yeah, okay, I thought so. It's a pretty cool place to work. So I want to talk about the difference between the engine of capitalism that got us to where we are today. That's the engine that was really built here in the era of manufacturing, the rise of the industrial society, and the engine of capitalism that we need to build next, which is going to get us away from the negative consequences of this engine and into a sustainable society. And I've labeled this old co, old types of companies, and new co, new types of companies. So Ford is an old co, Google is a new co. Old co's were built in an era where you could address a market many or one to many. You made, Henry Ford was famous for saying you can have any color Model T you want as long as it's black. NewCos look at every single individual as a market of one and attempt to come up with a product that fits them. This is obviously easier to do digitally than it is in atoms in physical space. But I was just at the Jacobs Center, and we're making progress on that, right, in terms of the ability to do design for a consumer of one. Old co's make things on very slow cycles. Iteration doesn't happen very fast. Innovation doesn't happen very fast. Automobiles are made in 4 to 8 year design cycles. New co's are always shipping new code, always shipping new approaches, right? Old companies looked at technology as this big thing they spent a lot of money on, and they would spend a lot of money on people and on machines they put on site. New co's are built in the cloud. This is really important. In the old approach to capitalism, employees are a resource, a human resource, HR. And that means they're seen as any other resource in a company, which means that they're expendable, right? They can be replaced. They can be worn out. NewCo sees employees as pretty much the core asset of the company. Human creativity and the ability for human beings to solve problems is the key asset in a NewCo. Old companies tend to look at employees as an asset to be managed in a command and control approach, just like a manufacturing line, right? Hierarchical management. NewCos enable their employees to manage themselves. Old co's are material first, which means that the most important thing they pay attention to in the information and material flows in their business is the cost of the commodities, the materials. New co's are all about the flows of information in markets. Old co's are driven by profit. This is the number one imperative of the old capitalism, which is the true north is Milton Friedman, Chicago School, maximize shareholder return. Companies exist to do one thing, extract capital from markets and put them into the pockets of shareholders. That has been, remember Greed is Good, for those of you who may watch old movies. For me, it was a movie I watched when I was your age, but Wall Street. Greed is good. Extract capital, put it in your pockets or put it in the pockets of your shareholders. NewCos are driven by purpose and see profit as table stakes to getting to that purpose. And the purpose is something greater that is beneficial to society, to the employees, and to the shareholders, to everyone who is impacted by the business. And I think that if we shift to this approach to companies, we can shift our society to a better place. But if we stick here, we're kind of screwed. The outputs of this system have been twofold. One, we've had a huge economic tax, which has created an income inequality that is unsustainable. And two, we have had a huge environmental tax, which has created climate change. And you're welcome. That's our legacy to you. You get to fix it, please. Can you please fix that? Because it kind of needs to get fixed. But we drove ourselves through what I call aggressive American steroidal capitalism because we had to win a war, a Cold War, against a different approach to economic organization, which was called communism. And we had to win at all costs, and we won by overproducing and overconsuming, and our inputs were fossil fuels and corn syrup. It's pretty simple. It's like a 2-cylinder engine, fossil fuel, corn syrup. You know, cheap food, cheap power, build a lot of stuff. And it got us where we are. We won. And that's the boomers' legacy. We won the Cold War. But at what cost? We need to build new companies to get to the next place. So there's 4 things that I think are driving a massive shift in our society right now. And I think they're all super important. One is technology, and I've spent 25 to 30 years telling that story. The second is demographic, and has to do with the 2 largest generations currently in the workforce. How many of you consider yourself millennials, even if it makes you roll your eyes? That's interesting. You're like, the hands are like this. They're not up here. It's like, so you don't like that term at all? Yeah, no one seems to like it. Anyways, 18 to 34, okay? Boomers, I'm in between. I'm Gen X, but boomers were the largest workforce participants up until just last year when millennials swamped them and became the largest force in the workforce. Cities and the rise of cities is a huge force in the global economy today. And what I'm calling the tipping point, that's really a friendlier way of saying climate change and economic inequality. So I'm going to just jump into each one very, very briefly. For the first 15 to 20 years of my career, I covered the tech industry. It was a vertical industry. I covered HP. I covered Apple. I covered Microsoft. I covered these companies that grew up and became these verticals. And when you think about a vertical, right, there's automobiles, there's retail, there's energy, and then there's tech, right? And classic economics kind of looks at these different vertical sectors of the economy, and we understand them as their own industries. My argument is that we have to stop looking them as verticals. Like, here are the companies in this vertical, here are the companies in this vertical, here are the companies in this vertical, and look, here are the companies in technologies vertical, right? That's how we have been trained to think about technology. It's this industry that's impacting us, right? I don't think about it that way anymore. I think about it as a horizontal, as infrastructure, as something everyone accesses that creates new economic opportunity. If you think about the United States before 1956, before we passed the Interstate Highway Act that created a river of concrete between every major city in the United States and enabled a new era of trade, it didn't just rewrite trade and our economy, it rewrote how we built houses, where we built them, what their architecture was, what the communities were that lived in those suburbs, and how that community responded to each other, and how they communicated with each other, and how they bought stuff, and where that stuff got bought. Right? As soon as we created a new infrastructure everyone could access equally, our entire society changed. We just did that with tech. We just did that in the last 20 to 30 years. And we're about to see a new society emerge. So technology is now powering everything. One of the things we do at NewCo are these really cool festivals. We've done 45 of them in 18 cities around the world. And the idea is there are new kinds of companies happening everywhere in the world, not just here in the Bay Area where we're lucky to live or go to school, but in every major city in the world, there are incredible companies that could have never existed 5 or 10 years ago because there wasn't Amazon Web Services, because there wasn't Slack or some communication tool you could stand up for free so that you could communicate with people around the world. There wasn't Google Hangouts or Google Apps that you could use for free. If you wanted to build a tech-enabled company, not even a tech company, just a tech-enabled company 5 years ago, you would have had to spend anywhere from $1 million to $5 million just on tech. Now you don't. Now you can do that for $10,000 or even less. The second point, generational. This is really interesting, but if you think about it, the boomers are facing what? They're old. Death, mortality, I'm trying to ignore the fact that I'm on the top end of that Generation X, very close to the boomer cutoff. But the boomers are facing mortality. And when you're facing the end of your life, you reflect back and say, what's my legacy? How'd I do? Did I leave the world a better place? Am I proud of the work I did over the last 40 or 50 years of my career? The boomers aren't answering that question with an awful lot of optimism. They look back and say, damn, Miami is flooding now, 6 to 7 times a year. And it wasn't when I started my career. What's that about, right? They're looking back and saying, geez, when I entered the workforce in the 1950s, 1960s, the middle class was robust. The middle class was growing. Now the middle class is hollowed out, and there is an extraordinary amount of people either in poverty or incredibly wealthy. And something happened in the middle during those 50 years when I was a productive member of the workforce. So they're a bit anxious about their own legacy. Meanwhile, millennials are incredibly optimistic. They're also extraordinarily entrepreneurial. How many of you think you'll be involved in a startup in the next 5 to 10 years? There you go, okay? When I graduated from college, there was not a box you could check saying you were going to be an entrepreneur. It wasn't a thing. It wasn't a job description. No one even knew what it was. As a matter of fact, when I first heard the word, I looked it up. And what I found out about an entrepreneur was it's either a crazy person who, like Sam Walton, right, or Henry Ford, who were like psychotic, literally psychotic human beings, or it was someone who had a chain of like dry cleaning franchises. Seriously, there was a magazine called Entrepreneur, and it was like how to start like auto dealerships and dry cleaning franchises and stuff like that. The idea of entrepreneur that we're so used to today is very new. But 54% of millennials say they're going to start a company worldwide, which would be like 1.7 billion companies, okay? I know it feels like that here, but that's just a lot of energy towards starting something new, right? Here's some happy boomers. They're not thinking about their legacy. They're probably paying canasta, whatever that is. They're anxious, they're wealthy. They have the most wealth of any generation in the history of the world. They're in charge. The average age of a board member at a public company, and I'm on a public company board, is 64 years old, okay? They are the Mad Men, and I don't mean like the television show, although they really did come out of that era. They are the Mad Men because they are the only generation, except for you guys, to be born into existential crisis. When they came of age, they walked around thinking that at any moment, the world was going to explode, literally explode, and they would be wiped out, okay? That was their truth when they were your age. They ducked under desks in air raid drills for nuclear war when they were your age. Imagine doing that now. I mean, really, a desk? It's going to help you when the nuke goes off? But they were sort of formed in this existential crisis that the world could end at any moment, which is just interesting to think of culturally. Of course, the biggest issue when you ask them that they care about is healthcare, because their bodies are failing. But they happen to be living longer and longer and longer because we have extraordinary healthcare. Now let's look at happy millennials. They're dominant. There's 83 million of them in the United States alone. They're purpose-driven. This is super interesting to me, that a vast majority of them say that the main reason they want to work is to create positive change in the world. And they demand that if they had a choice, they would prefer to work at a place that ladders to their personal values. Now, that was not the boomers. The boomers got a job they hated so they could have a life. Millennials want their job and their life to be integrated. And so they need the values of both to be, integrated. They're entrepreneurial, I already mentioned that. And the first generation to really grow up with computers, and then later with real digital through smartphones. They're secular. The numbers of religious and deeply religious millennials is the lowest of any generation that's ever been recorded. And their biggest issue is climate change, like with a bullet. The next big issue after that is income inequality. Now here's the bridge. These guys have all the money. These guys want to start companies. What do you know, right? A lot of these guys don't even realize they're funding your next company because they have their money at T. Rowe Price or Vanguard or Fidelity, which is then taking their money and shuttling it over to become an LP at Kleiner Perkins or Mayfield or any of the other funds, right? So they don't even realize it, but the economic system is conspiring to build a bridge between these two. And I think it's exciting because these guys know a lot and have a lot of experience. And I hate to say it, but not so much over here, right? So, and I've spent a lot of time advising a lot of startups. And what I love is the energy and the optimism and the ability to run through walls. But what's frustrating sometimes is how the real world hasn't yet permeated the barrier. So the connection between the two, I think, is something new. We used to talk about a generation gap. I think there's a bridge. Now, cities. This will be fast. Super fast. 1 generation ago, a third of us, humanity, lived in cities. Last year, it crossed 50%. 66% 1 generation from now. By the end of this century, 84% of humanity will live in metropolises. This is just sort of an undeniable fact. What is it about cities? Charles Darwin called them evolutionary forces. They came out of tangled banks, places where lots and lots of flora and fauna. It was a riot of different biology. That's what cities are. It's a riot of culture, of different people bumping into each other, finding out they might have something in common, sitting down and talking and coming up with ideas and trying new things, right? Cities are the wombs of innovation. They are also the place where we have our biggest problems, right? I mean, cities are where we have, slums and favelas. It's where we have, crime, and cities create 70% of the carbon emissions on the planet. Cities are where we will create our big problems, and cities are where we will solve them. Cities are where great companies are born. And then fourth, and I've alluded to climate change a number of times, but we are at a tipping point. Unfortunately, we just elected a president who seems to think that climate change is a hoax. It is not. I am not a scientist. You shouldn't believe me. Just read the same number of scientists believe that smoking is bad for you as believe that climate change is true. So if we're just going to avoid science altogether, we may as well just stop learning because it's a fact. And I see it in the places I used to go as a kid to ski that don't have snow anymore, and I'm sure you see it too. It's a very real thing, and we have to deal with it because most of our cities are on coasts. And at the end of this century, if we continue to raise the sea levels, we will probably see 1/3 to 1/2 of our cities underwater. That's going to be bad. That's going to be wars and migration and famine and just bad stuff. So when you see the Pope and the guy who spends the most money on advertising in the entire planet, the CMO of Procter & Gamble, saying roughly the same thing about climate change and roughly the same thing about making their companies align with new approaches to sustainability, we've got a movement on our hands. So what does this all mean? Techos Infrastructure means new kinds of companies can start anywhere. The generational bridges means they get funded. The rise of the cities is where they can start and take root. And society at tipping point gives them a purpose. So I argue that a new kind of company is reinventing capitalism. They're mission-driven. Google, I showed you that picture before. Google's mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible. That's an amazing mission. Facebook's mission is to make the world more open and connected. That's an amazing mission, right? The best companies have really core missions that make the world a better place. They're high growth, they're information first, I think we're going to get into that, and they thrive in cities. And they're coming for the incumbents. I'm just going to give you a couple examples. Obviously Uber, and you could say taxis. I should just say, and everything else with Uber, because let's get into that in Q&A if you want, because I got a lot to say about Uber. Airbnb is going after the entire hospitality business. As a matter of fact, Airbnb's market cap, private market cap, is now larger than the Hyatt Group's market cap. And then in technology, everyone's like, oh, tech's always cutting edge. No, it's not. Tech eats its own all the time, right? So Salesforce just, took SAP's growth, just cut it out by going to the cloud. So they have new models, these businesses, right? And really fresh thinking. They identify new consumer behaviors, sometimes behaviors we didn't know we had or wanted to have, right? So, I don't know how many of you 5 or 10 years ago would have thought you'd be sleeping in a stranger's home, right? And paying for the privilege, but that's Airbnb, right? They focus on providing amazing experiences, and I'm sure this is what many of you are focused on if you're in engineering or product or entrepreneurial or business. You're thinking about UX and customer experience. They have mission at their core. There's a new social contract in work. And it really comes down to this. When I started, every company I've started actually has had one rule, which is you can take off any time you want. You can come and go as you please. But you have to be here when we're doing something important, and you have to get your shit done. And if you don't, you're out. But we trust you to do it however you feel it gets done best. Because when people are treated like independent, autonomous, intelligent human beings, they do their best work. As opposed to punch a clock, do your hours, and having someone watching you all the time. NewCos find potential information flows and they optimize for them. Now, this is the only academic part of my presentation. There is in biology and ecology a pretty well-established idea called living systems, and it's been applied to business. Living systems, self-organizing living things that interact with their environment, and they are based on flows of information, energy, and matter. Okay? So when you think about a company, right, composed of living organisms, human beings, right, and flows of information, energy, and matter. Energy is the power to make something, the power to drive something around. If you're Netflix, it's the power to make sure the bits get in the right order to your device, right? Information are the bits. Matter is whatever's required to make those bits. For a century, companies really focused on energy and matter, right? If you're an assembly plant or if you're Ford Motor Company, what you really care about is, do I have enough power to my plants? And do I have control of my supply lines? Can I get enough rubber for my tires and enough metal for my cars, right? As much as it mattered, information was just the management structure you used to control energy and matter. Information was just the way you told those two things to do stuff, right? New kinds of companies put information first. They rethink the way information flows in a market, and they actually push energy and matter around in different ways. So Uber turns transportation into information flows. Airbnb turns hospitality into information flows. DocuSign turns trust into information flows. Have you guys ever used DocuSign? I mean, I think you're growing up in a very special time where DocuSign's normal, but when I bought my first house, I had to spend a day signing stuff at a notary I had to drive to for an hour. It was, and you're just signing like 60 pages of stuff you never could read. DocuSign makes that trust into something that's a new flow that I can literally sign a house on my phone. Super cool. And I wanted to use one example that you guys might find interesting. How many of you guys have ever heard of a company called Earnest? 1, 2, okay. Earnest is in financial services, and what they do is lend money, which is one of the oldest professions in the world. The other one, I don't know if it's gone digital yet. Well, certainly access to it has gone digital. It's an information-first lender. Now remember, lenders like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, right? These are people who lend you money. That's what they do. But they look at it as an information-rich, information-first problem as opposed to the way old co's were doing lending. So let me break it down for you. First, let me show you the information flows in a leading US lending company. And I talked to a friend who worked at one of those companies who gave me this information. They start with you, which of course is one bit of information, your social security number. The reason they want that is so they can get your FICO score. FICO is a score that's made up of your credit history, a bunch of different information that becomes one data point, your FICO score. And roughly, your FICO score goes from 300 to 850, and if you're over 650, the chances that you can even get the loan increase. If it goes higher than that, then the amount of interest you would pay for that loan goes down a little bit. They also they ask for your employment history, and they sometimes check to see if you're lying, but not that much, because the FICO score for them is good enough. They have less than 5 key data points they use to determine whether or not you get your loan, and they will charge you 11 to 15% for that loan. Now, let's say you live in Boston and you just graduated college and you got this great job out here in the Bay Area and you need to move across the country and you need to pay first and last on an apartment. So you need 10 grand, right? Because you're going to get like you're going to get a studio apartment and share it with 3 people because it's San Francisco. But still, you need to come up with 5 grand for first and last, and you got to get a truck and move stuff across. You need 10 grand, right? And you got a bunch of college debt too. You're going to pay 15%, maybe more, for that loan. Okay? Here's how. Oh, by the way, the default rate, the people who end up not paying, 10%. Here's how Earnest does it. They turn lending into this very sophisticated information flow. The first thing they do is they will not allow you to apply for a loan unless you connect through a LinkedIn. Okay? Why? Because they take everything in LinkedIn and run it through a sophisticated set of algorithms to understand who you are, not just in terms of your job history, but who you're connected to, and how active you are, and how engaged your network is with you. And they know that someone who's more engaged, someone who sends a lot of messages, who reads a lot of stuff, someone who is, reaching out and networking is more likely to pay. But they don't stop there. They also ask you to integrate with your banks with their systems so they can see your full financial history. And then they'll run a bunch of sophisticated data analysis on that as well to determine whether or not you're going to be a good risk. So this is me. I started doing it, and I realized I don't need a loan. What am I doing? I wish I needed I needed a loan when I was a grad student, God knows. I had a lot of them. It took me 10 years to pay them off. But they have over 100 key data points that they use to determine your risk as a potential customer of theirs. Their average rate that they charge is 4 to 6%, which is less than half of what the old cos charge. So way better deal. And by the way, the chances of you getting a loan are higher because they understand you as a person, not as a FICO score. They have not had a default, and they've written over $1 billion in loans. Pretty cool. One of the reasons they haven't had a default is because the customer experience at Earnest is so different. They will look into your bank account and go, hey, you got a payment of $150 coming up in 2 weeks, and you've got $25 in your account. Is everything cool? Do you need it a little more time? I mean, imagine a bank saying that to you. A bank just basically gives you the finger as soon as you don't pay. Right? It's pretty cool. Different kind of company, a new kind of company. So, technology's made information density a fact, right? There is so much information about us that it's not being leveraged by old cos. But new cos understand how to take that density and turn it into new market opportunities. And of course, they will take the customers of old cos all day long. And that's been the story of our current economy. So here's a handy chart. Now, this is the only thing that I did 3 or 4 years ago, so for those of you who might have been here 3 or 4 years ago, forgive me. But I like to think about technology and our interaction with it in this series of waves. And they kind of make sense. So down here, we've got time. Up here, we've got the number of people interacting with technology. Okay. And over here, we have the size of the technology industry. Remember what I talked about, how we had a technology industry for so many years? Well, let's start in 1970. I was actually alive then, but only 5. So how many people were in the technology industry? Well, not that many, just about 10 million people. And this was the era of very large computers, of mainframes, right, and mini computers. And mainly what we did as an economy with computing, with technology, was we digitized the back office of very large companies, mid-sized to large companies, 1,000 employees and up. We took inventory, payroll, accounting, the number stuff that was done in the back office, and we digitized it and made it easier and better, right? So the number of people involved in that, not so many. But what I'm most interested in is, how did we interact with that technology as human beings? What was our experience of that technology, right? For most people, there was no experience because they didn't interact with the computer at all, right? So here's what it looked like. I can't even find a picture of Fortran or COBOL or any of those other programming languages from way back then, but it was basically the C prompt. If any of you are familiar with the Unix prompt or with the DOS prompt, any of you? I'm talking to, okay, great. So do you remember the languages you used when you were doing that? Like for DOS, it was, if you wanted to find out what was on the computer, you had to go dir, dir, right, directory, dir, and so you typed it in. It made no sense, and so the number of people who could actually engage with this technology had to learn a programming language was very, very few, right? Then what happened? All of a sudden, we put the front office online, and everybody in the knowledge economy got a computer on their desk, right? And all of a sudden, a bunch more people had to engage with technology, right? This was during the time in the 80s when Time Magazine made the personal computer the man of the year. Because all of a sudden, everybody in an office environment had a computer on their desk. And they all had to learn these new applications, and they all had to start using, stuff that was really unnatural for them, right? We needed a new interface because not everyone was going to learn Unix or DOS to work in that environment. We needed a new interface. And of course, that interface, well, it was really Windows that won, but the Macintosh was the gold standard for this new interface, which I call the hunt and peck interface. Called the graphical user interface, but the hunt and peck interface, because you're kind of going like this, right? Which is very similar to what you do when you're in a foreign country and you don't speak the language, right? You're just like, that's like, I need to go to the bathroom, where is it, right? Sign language, right? We're using sign language. And that was an explosion. That's when the tech industry became a real industry. That's when companies like HP and Apple went public, right? There's Microsoft and Microsoft. Did you know Microsoft went public for $600 million in market cap? And it's now multi-hundred billions. Can you imagine just buying 10 shares of stock when they went public? It's crazy because now companies are staying private forever, and you've got companies like Uber worth $70 billion and you can't buy a share of it. It's terrible for our economy, but that's a whole other thing. So what happened next? Well, in the mid-90s, we once again took everything and exposed it to a huge audience. What did we do? Well, all the companies that had their back office digitized and their front office digitized, they all got a website. And so did a lot of other people. We took all that information that was internal and we made it external. And we put it out on the web for everybody to see. And there was this massive explosion of the number of people who were all of a sudden touched by technology through the internet. And there's no way we're going to hunt and poke our way through that stuff, right? We needed a new interface, and we got it in Google. Now, Google has a command line interface, a little blinking cursor with a line that looks an awful lot like this. But the difference is you don't have to speak a new language to navigate through Google, right? It's a natural language query, which is insane. I mean, how cool is that? You use words, right? I think it's one of the coolest things we've done in the last 100 years. I wrote a book about it, so I'm biased. It's a big deal, though. So all of a sudden, we had everyone who ever was online connected to technology and using this amazing new natural language query tool called search. We're kind of due, don't you think, for some new shift, right? But we're starting to approach a pretty damn big industry now, right? It's bigger than tech. What is the next interface? Right? We're due for it. You can see the cycles are kind of every 15 to 20 years. I don't know. Facebook wants to know, so does Microsoft, so does Apple, so does Google. So does Amazon, right? Hey, Alexa, how many of you guys have one of those? Right? Those are interesting and limited. So let me reset the chart and pretend we're just starting from here, where, here's your talk with customers, the internet, right? And now I have to break all the charts in terms of the number of participants that are engaged in technology and the size of the industry, because both scale way beyond where we've been in the past. The number of participants scales way past the number of human beings on the planet, because now we have machines talking to machines. And the size of the industry scales to the size of the global GDP, because everything is leveraging technology now. And everything is animated by digital and integrated with analog. So if Google was the last one, now everything talks to everything. This is super cool. I have one example for you about what I mean by that. And when I think about what this means, I just suggest you read a book which is very flawed but awesome, called The Circle by Dave Eggers. And the reason I want you to read it is because it imagines a world where this has actually already happened. And there is one company that has this entire interface integrated. And it's kind of like you put Apple, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft into a blender. And out came this company called The Circle. So this idea that everything of value will be able to talk with everything else of value is a very important idea in terms of thinking about how technology is going to work in the next generation. But I want to give you a very simple kind of metaphor for this, which is a visit to a retail store for young girls, from my point of view. Okay, how many of you are familiar with Forever 21? Okay, because all of you thought it was super cool like 5 years ago, right? Now maybe not so much, because you're 21, and you're not going to be Forever 21 anymore. I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. I mean, good drugs can help, but okay, so let's go to Forever 21 like 2 years from now, okay? In the era when everything talks to everything, okay? I'm scared of this place. Everyone's young and hip, and they smell like good, but not good in a way you want to hang out in for too long, They're really big. Inside, they're packed, usually with people who are young and really excited, right? I'm a dad. I'm uncomfortable in a place like this, okay? But I need to go there because my sort of preteen girl has been badgering me forever for this one thing that you can only get in the store. And I know you can get it online, but it means a lot for her if I make the effort. And I'm a good dad. I'm going to make the effort. I'm going to go in that store, and I'm going to get that bag that means I went to the store, as opposed to the bag that comes when you order it online. And that experience of going into the store and presenting that as a gift to my daughter is meaningful in this culture. It is. So I'm going to get my handy-dandy old Samsung phone going here, and I'm going to say, okay, Google, where's the nearest Forever 21? I'm driving home. There's like one within 5 miles of anywhere, So, okay, and it helps me with that magic of the blue dot and the red pin, and it brings me there. But it creates a set of data already. I have just asked the cloud of connected everything to everything where Forever 21 is. And the cloud knows I'm a 48-year-old guy with a couple of daughters. That's valuable information, which gets sent directly not only to Forever 21 where I'm going, because you can see the blue line, it's there, I'm going, right? But to every competitor of Forever 21 within a 5-mile radius, which starts inundating my phone with requests for me to go to their place, which I ignore, because I gotta go, I'm on a mission. I gotta go to this one store and get this one sweater she wants. And I want the gift wrapping that says I went there. What happens next? I get to this store, take a deep breath. I'm hoping I can hold it for the whole period of time I'm in the store. Because Abercrombie and Fitch and Forever 21, they smell this, it's overwhelming if you're not used to it. So I'm like, here I go. Got my phone out, I walk into the store, I don't know where the sweaters are. It looks like that. How am I supposed to find the sweaters? Well, fortunately, there's an indoor map that takes me directly to the sweaters. Now I have a conundrum. There's this big rack of sweaters. Which size is right for her? Hold it up. It ring fences it on my phone. And it says, pull that one. So I pull that one. I probably knocked the whole thing over, and the clerks are angry at me. Why do they know I'm there? Because as I walk through the door, every one of their phones lights up saying a customer's just come in and he's going to go get a sweater. Leave him alone. Do not engage. So no one pays me any mind as I walk straight up to those sweaters, hold my phone up, pull it out, turn. I'm walking out the door when one of the, because they have an intelligence system that says the retail clerk who is nearest the door, make sure he gets the box and the bow and the bag. So Mr. Battelle, she looks up, gets my eye, would you like the box and the bag? Oh God, yes, thank you. She gives it to me and I walk out. I don't pay. Why? Because I already paid. Because as soon as I walked through the door, they knew I was there. My phone activated their systems and connected. And as soon as I walked out, the retail clerk just does this and I'm charged and I'm out. That took 45 seconds and I could hold my breath the whole time. That is the customer experience I want to have in Forever 21. My daughter wants to spend half a day there. That's a different customer experience, and I couldn't even tell you what it's like, but I guarantee you that if this company does not figure it out, they're out of business. And the only way they can is if everything is connected to everything. And that's just the beginning. Now I'm done. Thank you so much for listening, and I'd love to take some questions. I took longer than I thought I would. I'm really sorry. I didn't realize I'd talk for 45 minutes.
It's getting to be a tradition.
I guess I did it last time, too.
Go ahead.
I have a question. Yeah, sorry. Hi. I had a question. A lot of the stuff you mentioned reminded me of this one author I've read. His name's Douglas Rushkoff. He's a professor at CUNY. His most recent book, he was really critical of Uber and a lot of these other companies because he says they're doing the exact same thing that the old companies did, and that's pretty much just trying to find a way to monetize a new industry and maximize profit. Yeah. And he said that it's basic. What Uber is giving low prices to the consumer comes at the cost of a lack of real the kind of safety standards and bureaucracy that make taxi companies so more reliable. And he was really critical of Uber specific. Yep. I was wondering what your opinion on it was, seeing as you guys seem to have similar opinions.
Douglas wrote for me at Wired. So I know him. I reviewed his book. If you just put my name and his name together, you'll find my review. I think he's mostly right. But I think that his point of view, where I differ with him is I'm an optimist, and I think he's more of a cynic. I think companies like Uber have a responsibility to understand the impact of their business beyond the positive benefits that are directly related to the service itself. They're already doing an extraordinary amount of good in the world. There are probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people who are alive today because they didn't get behind the wheel of a car when they were drunk or stoned or whatever. And there are probably, there are certainly millions of people who are super happy to have the income from Uber that they didn't have before. That being said, there are, I estimate 6,000 capital shareholders of Uber, maybe a few more, maybe a few less, of any substance, not including option holders who might be employees who get 100 or 1,000 options, but significant capital shareholders of Uber. And Uber has been recently valued at $68 billion, which means 6,000 people are going to make $68 billion. That does not seem equitable to me. At the same time that it's hollowed out a massive industry, which is providing rides, and expanded that industry by 10x. It has not considered the transfer of wealth that it is responsible for, and whether or not some of that transfer of wealth should possibly be taxed for the benefit of society, beyond the standard capital taxes that occur with long-term capital gains and things like that. It's not really Uber's fault that they haven't given those ideas much thought up till now, but I argue that they need to start engaging in that discussion, because the next thing that happens with Uber is that those millions of drivers' jobs go away as driverless cars come, right? And Uber's already got an advanced, they see not having a driverless car program as existential. If they don't have it, they're done. They're out of business. Because as soon as Google turns theirs on, or Tesla turns theirs on, or Apple, or VW, or Ford, or whoever does it, they're out of business. They're out of business. So it's existential. And they, on the one hand, say they have all these drivers that they're making these incomes for. On the other hand, 15 years, 20 years from now, they'll have no employees. They'll be the most efficient, extractor of capital from markets that puts it in the pockets of shareholders. Douglas is upset with them by the framework of traditional view of capitalism. I think we need collectively to push Uber into the dialogue of what is the role of a company like Uber in a society that it is responsible for creating. And I think that is a hard conversation, but it has to happen.
A question over here.
Oh, I'll let you just... Yeah.
Hi, my name is Tobias. I'm an exchange student from the Netherlands. And I was wondering, all these new technologies are very cool, and I cannot wait to work in these kind of technologies and do something with it. But I'm also quite concerned because we have a lot of computer programmers and a lot of people who can program these kinds of things. But the more these technologies become more difficult and the more they grow like Uber, the more jobs will go away. We already see a large decline in jobs. Yeah. And I think that's also quite concerning, because what are we going to do with all these people who don't have jobs anymore when we go into the fourth industrial revolution? Yeah. So how do you think about this?
Tomorrow night, I'm going to one of 3 dinners over the next 2 weeks on basic income. And it's just become a very hot topic here in the Valley, particularly among bleeding heart liberals like myself, who aren't afraid of government and who think government is actually a group of all of us getting together to get shit done. That's what government's supposed to be, right? Basic income is a very complicated topic, and it is not solved. But what is often not remembered about basic income is we passed it in the House in the legislature, in Congress in 1970. The 2 people who wrote the legislation are Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, who, if you're students of history, those were Reagan's hawks who started the whole war machine that kind of got us where we are today, and were the architects of neoliberal economics, which got us where we are today. And Richard Nixon, was the guy who championed it. So this is not as radical an idea as we might think. The idea that in a society that we can imagine and are beginning to create that is so productive that we don't have to work all the time, maybe a basic human right is enough money to live on. That's a pretty radical idea, but it's time to have the conversation about that idea, because otherwise we end up with a sort of emergency room approach to our whole society, which is to say, when you run out of money, you got to go to the ER, and it costs 10 times as much to deal with the problems of running out of money as if you deal with them proactively, right, and have a wellness-based approach to health or an income-based approach to sustainable living. So these are, I think, really important questions. There's 2 answers to what do we do with ourselves if we don't have to work. One school of thought says that the creative portion of humanity, making things, art, music, entertainment, will become much more valued in our society. And so we will all become makers again of something, and we'll value that, whether it's dinner for a friend, or it's being a movie star. Another argument. I'm completely spacing on it. Connection, relationship. I run a publication called NewCo shift.newco.co. And if you look at the story that I just published today, it's about a company named Honor. It started by Seth Sternberg, who's an ex-Googler. And Honor is a platform connecting healthcare providers, in-home elder care providers, for all those happy, shiny boomers, to the family of parents for people whose parents are getting older. This is a crisis we're going straight into. There's 40 million seniors in the United States right now. There'll be 80 million in 25 years. So they need to be taken care of, right? Robots can't take care of human beings the way human beings can take care of human beings. We crave connection and relationship. So another argument is that an economic thing we will value that we don't really value now is relationship and connection, and that we will pay for that, and that will create a new set of jobs. Seth Sternberg thinks there'll be 5 million new jobs in that space in the next 20 years, which is almost how many jobs we'll lose to Uber becoming an automated driving system.
I think we can take 2 more questions.
Sorry, I'm going too long. I'll do headlines now.
Here, we'll go right here. Blue hat.
Hello. I have one question about just the tech space. So like, just following up on that question about Uber and how like everything is becoming, or even just your presentation at the end, you were talking about how like you want that experience to be 45 seconds, nothing more. And like seeing how like Airbnb, like, you know, you're just meeting up with someone random and you're renting out your room to someone you don't know, or you're getting into like a Uber or Lyft ride with someone you really don't know still. Like, a lot of our like kind of security is, I feel like is being compromised. And like, it's kind of like conflicting with your idea of like wanting that experience with all the information being in the cloud and all your debit cards being on like your phone. And, where do you see this going in the future? And do you think it'll get to a point where it compromises your security to a point where it can be used against you in any way?
Yes. I think we're literally renegotiating the social contract in real time because of these new possibilities, which means there's going to be a lot of screw-ups, there's going to be a lot of lessons learned. I mean, Airbnb's whole mission is about connecting a host and a traveler and creating a native environment or a native experience. But the truth is, I've stayed in a ton of Airbnbs around the world, and I've met the host 3 times, right? It's what's being marketed and what's the reality is often quite different, right? But I think we're at the first phase of it. I think we are all social creatures and we want to connect and we want to relate. And I think that we value that, and we will increasingly create products and services that allow for that. The other thing we value is safety and, you know, and trust. The truth is, I mean, I have very complicated views about Facebook, but there's no way that any of these services could have existed without Facebook. Because it's a sort of the first line of defense as to how we can know whether someone is, you know, going to kill us. Oh, well, they've got a profile on Facebook. Here's their friend network. Oh, we have one friend in common, or I'm one connection from them, right? And online ratings and all of this stuff that are starting to get quite sophisticated. Algorithms are better and better at identifying. I did an interview and talked about this very thing with the founder of Airbnb, again on NewCo Shift, which you can check out. But he talked about how they literally have so much data now that their trust and safety department can tell whether or not a host is going to be potentially a problem or a guest. And so it's pretty cool. So I think we'll get there, but there will be a lot of, you know, when we went from, you know, agriculture to industrial economies, a lot of people died. There was a lot of safety issues there, a lot. So hopefully we'll have a lot less as we go into this new economy.
John, I want to give students an opportunity to also talk with you directly and not
Sure.
have you stay too long.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I will say without a doubt, I don't think we've ever had a speaker where people were this quiet and stayed put for this long a time.
Awesome.
So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the food for thought and for the future and the past. And we look forward to seeing you in 3 years.
Right on. All right.